Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorfi, and today I'm very, very excited and honored to be interviewing a very special space champion, Mr. Patrick Estep, whom I met at the 2023 AsMA conference. Patrick is a graduate of the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where he earned a master's in biomedical engineering with a focus in orthopedic biomechanics. He has since transitioned into studying and understanding all things related to human performance in both physical and cognitive domains. During his 5 years at the Johnson Space Center, he has supported numerous projects within the Human Physiology, Performance, Protection, and Operations Laboratory to develop and characterize exploration EVA tasks and simulations. He also implemented systems to support bioinformatics and decision support technologies and validated operational pre-breathe protocols for future exploration EVAs. Patrick is currently the technical area lead for the Spacesuits and Exploration Operations team within the lab and has so many incredible stories and work and projects he probably has been working on at NASA that I'm excited to dig a little bit deeper into today. So, welcome, Patrick. Thank you so much for taking your time to inspire the next generation of aerospace leaders. I'm very excited to learn a little bit about your journey and what got you into working at NASA and specifically with the work you're currently doing.
Yeah, likewise. I've been looking forward to this. So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, to kick off our conversation, I wanted to first start off by asking about your typical day. I know usually as an engineer at NASA, I'm sure there is never a typical day, but how do you generally like to structure your morning and your work day?
Whew, um, that's a very loaded question. So I think for context, I'll start by talking a little bit about our lab structure, just very briefly. So the H-3PO Lab, it has three different technical areas, and it's comprised of folks with very different disciplinary backgrounds. We have folks from medical, physiologists, engineers, data scientists. We kind of run the whole gambit of the STEM field. It's broken up into three different technical areas. So there's one technical area that's focused on applied injury biomechanics, which is kind of exactly what it sounds like, thinking about launch and entry and abort scenarios and different accelerative loading and injuries or risk of injury associated with those sorts of things, as well as some that are related to the spacesuit, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. The second technical area is focused on exercise performance and countermeasures. So as I think folks watching this will know, there is some level of deconditioning that we experience in spaceflight because we don't have to fight gravity essentially to keep ourselves upright or moving around or whatever. And so there is some deconditioning that happens, and we need to know that um, are people still fit enough, or what kind of performance and health benefits can we provide by giving them enough exercise, and what kind of exercises we administer to them and at what weights or levels and things like this. So they're very focused on that sort of thing. And I kind of butchered their description, but it's close enough that they won't be too mad at me. So um, and then the third technical team is the team that I lead for Spacesuits and Exploration Operations. And so it's really cool because it does tie to actually some of the different things that Emily Matula talked about in one of your recent episodes, where she's very on like the engineering and the ops side, but we're kind of on the junction of like what's the cost to the human of being in a spacesuit and doing extravehicular activities. What is their metabolic rate? What is their heart rate? Are they working too hard? Can we then turn that back into something that like informs the life support system? Does the life support system need to be able to do more, or is it able to do its job, or these kinds of things? So um, one of the very unique things about the SSEO technical area that we lead is that it's very broad. If you kind of think, and I'm biased here, so I'm going to get on a soapbox for a second, but I think that a lot of the future for exploration is very EVA centric. We expect to go to the moon, and we're going to get in a spacesuit, and we're going to go do geology and do science and things like that. And so all of these kind of different programs and operational concepts kind of have to build up the EVA in different ways. And so I make the joke that we're kind of like cranberries in the juice aisle at the store. Like we just get into everything, but somehow it always funnels back to EVA. So So, with all of that kind of background being said, my typical day here varies pretty radically. I wear a lot of different hats. Um, when I was first kind of hired on as a human performance engineer, I was working a lot as kind of a dedicated project engineer. So I was putting hands on hardware and sensors and using MATLAB and doing data analysis and these kinds of things for different physiologic data traces that we were seeing. So we have a thermal chamber. I spent some time like working with that and understanding how that is kind of interacting with different parts of the liquid cooling and ventilation garment, and supporting some testing there. I was also doing a lot of work with CO2 and metabolic rate analyzers, again, trying to understand kind of the physical workload that humans are putting forth in order to complete the different EVA tasks and objectives. And then one of the other actually really cool and specific studies was focused on what we call pre-breathe protocols. And what happens in the case of pre-breathe, I think a lot of people have just generally heard about the bends when you think about diving. And what causes that is kind of a large pressure transition, and effectively it makes some of the nitrogen in your body want to come out of solution, and that can kind of get lodged in joints and nerves and things like this. And that's kind of what imparts, some of the different pain or neurologic issues that you can see depending on the severity. And so that kind of pressure transition we also experience in space flight as well, as you go from ISS, which has an Earth-like atmosphere, and you get into a lower pressure spacesuit. You see that same risk for decompression sickness or the bends kind of pop up. And so I was supporting a lot of engineering level things to build up a study to validate a pre-breathe protocol. And kind of what that means is that, like right now on ISS, before we do an EVA, there's a whole bunch of things that go on to kind of get in the airlock and get the suit ready and these things.
Mm,
But one of the parts that happens during that is an oxygen pre-breathe, where the crew are basically breathing in oxygen. They're trying to offboard that nitrogen out of their system to reduce that risk for decompression sickness. Um, one of the big, I'm going to say, issues relative to exploration with that is that that process takes a significant amount of time and resources. It's on the order of like 4 to 4.5 hours. Um, for exploration, that changes quite a bit. On ISS, we do an EVA every couple months or so. But for exploration, we're talking about doing EVAs multiple times a week, and so we can't be spending 4 to 4.5 hours of time or more,
yeah.
um, and all that oxygen as well, getting ready to go EVA. And so the idea was like, let's put together a study to see if we can have people live at a lower pressure, higher oxygen atmosphere and saturate and kind of innately offboard a lot of that
Mm,
nitrogen and replace it with some oxygen to reduce that pre-breathe time. And so I was a project engineer for that, trying to help establish requirements for the testing facility that we used and get a lot of the hardware kind of set up and approved and the data streams and things built out. So that's one hat that I wear is what you would really think is kind of a general project or study engineer. I have also kind of moved up and around in a bunch of different roles, kind of doing different leadership things as well. So in some cases it is, being maybe not quite a study PI, but a study lead, being the boots on the ground and making sure that the team has the oversight and the schedule and the resources, and we're approaching the science and the tasks and activities in the right way. Kind of keeping just operations driving on the ground, if you will, for all these different studies. So I spent some time doing that for a handful of different studies as well. In a couple of cases, I have served as more of a traditional like research principal investigator in a couple things, or I'm getting ready to in one case for a study that I'm super excited about. So I do a little bit of that, and again, like the higher level science. And then, of course, leading a full team with multiple people. I think we have something on the pretty close to 15 kind of full-time people on our
wow.
team, and probably as many projects, depending on how you slice and dice and look at some of them. But sitting at that level, there's also like a level of, I'm going to say, pseudo project management, just
Yeah.
because I'm not a I'm not a certified PMP. I'm not that smart at being organized and things, but I'm good enough that I can kind of see and oversee the team and make sure that we've got the right people working on the right things, and we have the allocations in place and all the schedules aligned, so we don't have one person supporting five different things at the same time, and these kinds of things. So I get to do a little bit of that. And then there's also a fair bit of strategic planning that goes into that as well. So um, one of my, I think, official titles that I'm one of the discipline scientists for the human research programs for all things extravehicular activity. And again, it's the human health and performance focused piece of that. And so trying to understand what's the cost of the human, how can we maintain or improve their health or performance during EVA? What are even the decrements associated with doing an EVA? How badly are we beating people up by putting them in a spacesuit this many times in a week and asking them to do, kneeling and doing geology and whacking rocks with a hammer for 6 hours at a time? So there's a little bit of like strategic planning at kind of a research level, but also some at a more overarching headquarters-ish wide level with some of the work that I support my leadership in. So figuring out like um, when we go to Mars and we think about communication delays being a big challenge, it's going to shift the paradigm a little bit from how we typically operate. So we think about, for every EVA right now, we basically have real time or near instantaneous communication between mission control and the crew members in flight. But when we go to Mars and you've got a 40 to 45-minute comm delay, we're not going to be able to rely on MCC in the same way. And so the idea is, what kind of informatics or decision support can we provide to the crew that they can kind of make some of those same assessments and judgment calls and decisions that MCC would be making, because they're not going to have the luxury potentially of waiting that time. So figuring out what kind of work and studies and direction we can put to that is something else that I also support. So um, that's my day in a nutshell. Can be any number of those things spread across any number of different meetings and projects. So it's for me, it's super fun and exciting because I get to do a lot of different things, which I really enjoy. I would go absolutely insane if I had to do the same thing for 40 hours a week. But it's all tied together and related, which is super cool. So I think that's probably enough rambling. That's kind of a start.
Yeah, no, I mean, first off, yeah, wow, you definitely hold a lot of different hats in so many different ways, but they all connect with the common theme of human performance. And when you consider EVA, I feel like it was really nice to hear kind of almost a general synopsis of what EVA looks like, what the work looks like. I don't know much about extracurricular like activity, how much astronauts have to prepare for that, and how I actually didn't know about the pre-breathe protocol. So this is my first time even hearing about this. So it's very interesting to just kind of get like a almost broad picture of how it all looks, which is very interesting. And another interesting thing you mentioned in your answer, I wanted to really highlight was how you said in your team there were people from all sorts of backgrounds working towards this idea of human performance when it comes to medicine, engineering, the physics, I'm sure, and many other aspects to it, which is incredible. And just thinking about when humans go to Mars, what that looks like, what the activity will look like, what do we do to protect humans? It's honestly very exciting. And a lot of times when we talk about human performance and we think about NASA, usually those two don't go together. You don't think medicine and space directly with each other all the time. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit more about this unique intersection and maybe how you think studying human performance in space could potentially help us understand human performance on Earth or potentially lead to innovations technologically that could help us on Earth. Because a lot of times, many people around the world are always like, why are we focusing so much on sending humans to Mars, humans to the moon? Why aren't robots enough? Aren't rovers enough? So why do you think studying human performance in space will help us here on Earth?
Oh, man, you're asking like big loaded questions, which I like. It's fun, but it's a lot to dissect. So um, I'll try to start at the beginning, and if I forget pieces, you may have to remind me throughout. But I do think that the intersection between engineering and the human, at least as it is right now, is super important. It's really easy to see the cool rockets and the incredible rovers and habitats and gateway and all the other different things that we're talking about, and it's really easy to see those big engineering, modern miracles, if you will, um, and forget that like there's a human there. There's a squishy pink bag that complains a lot or whatever. They don't always complain, but that's maybe a sick joke we make in research sometimes, that they all complain differently. But it's easy to forget that we are doing everything human centrically right now, and so making sure that again, we're supporting them through all of the difficult things that we're asking them to do in a very unforgiving environment, far away from home and loved ones and all the good joys of life, being able to go on a walk with your dog or have
Right.
poor takeout pizza or whatever it is. There's a lot that goes into that, and it can build up, and it can get to a point where it imparts significant impacts on them, and we got to make sure that like it from me. And actually, one of the things that I worked on before coming to NASA was doing some research at one of the Army labs, and it was like very focused on like these are our penultimate, I hesitate to call them resource, but it's like everything has to be done to protect and support these people. And I think spaceflight is very much the same way. And it's paramount that we do that because we're trying to leverage these people to understand everything that we don't know about life and existence and physics and the universe and all the other things. So I think that, piece has to stay. And I think sitting at that intersection is so cool because you do get to figure out, um, I think it's probably one of the most challenging environments to work in and think about performance in. It's very different when we think about putting people in this unforgiving environment, seeing some of the physiologic changes that happen with, again, like bone and muscle deconditioning, or thinking about how any of this might
Right.
affect the respiratory system and all these other things. We think about the pressure and the pre-breathe stuff as kind of a unique aspect to that as well. The list goes on and on and on, and so it is really cool, and that's one of the things that I love, is that it is such a unique and challenging environment. Now, with all of that being said, I think that's kind of what excites me about the work, is every day it's something different. Being, and again, coming back to EVA, being in a spacesuit on a foreign body or planet, it doesn't work the same way as you and I being in a shirt right now. We're putting people in basically their own personal spacecraft. It may not fit them quite perfectly. Some of the different designs, especially even with commercial suits, and I won't like say this specifically as a dig for any, but there's potential that like some of these new commercial suits move better or have different functions that changes how we approach things. Um, for example, if you or I were to try to squat down to pick something up, somebody in a spacesuit trying to do that same task, they move differently. They have to support more weight. They've got to fight the suit hardware and the pressure in the suit and get down to pick that thing up. And there's often alternate strategies that we see with that. And not just like generically, but it varies with individuals as well. And so figuring out how do we approach all of these unique aspects, um, it is a lot of fun. It is very
Definitely.
challenging, and we beat our heads into the wall and scratch our heads a lot. Like, how did that happen? What do we
Right.
do? But that's what's so cool. Um,
Yeah.
I
You have
sorry.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
um, so I think that understanding the performance and health in space in that extreme environment and with these really high performing tactical athletes is a phrase that's kind of used in the literature sometimes for these sorts of cohorts. I think there's ways that can be translated back into different things that we do on the ground, and there's a number of things that we kind of talk about or are talking about for EVA right now. A simple example is something, again, thinking about when we go to the moon and for the Artemis program. the operational concepts say that we can do multiple EVAs a week, up to 24 hours of EVA per week. And the big question for us is like, okay, that sounds great, but like, how much rest do we need in between that? Or what other kinds of things do we need to be able to do to support that? If you asked professional football teams to play 4 games in a week, they would lose their minds. And there
Yeah.
would be a lot of concerns. And so for us, it's kind of that same thing. And so figuring out like how do we get people ready for that? How do we prepare them for that? How do we take care of them once they're in that state? Are all things that in some capacity or another, I think we can translate back to life and activities and athletics and general performance on Earth. And I think I think I hit most of the points. The discussion about human versus robotics in space is definitely an interesting one that has been brought up a couple of times. And I think that the key argument that's usually made is, yes, it's safer, obviously, to send not a human to go to some foreign planet and collect rock and soil samples and do the science or whatever. But we lose that human eye and human mind for things. If I tell you to bring me a round red rock, like, yeah, the robot can go off and there's a million of those on Mars or however many, but maybe a human would see the one rock that's got like a light, green shimmer on it or spot, and that the robot may not have picked up or had the logic to pick up. And so that's a rough example, but that's the kind of thing where it's like we still feel like it's really important and valuable to have that human insight and intervention and decision making capability and general interest as well. Um, until we get to the point where robotics and AI are like advanced enough to be like Skynet and go off and decide all these things on their own. We have to have that. It's therefore imperative that we send humans to do these things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a key point, like throughout your answer, I could definitely see the passion that you have for this specific topic. But when you mentioned how there's such challenging questions when you think about sending humans to these types of missions, and these challenging questions lead to incredibly challenging scientific research that NASA is conducting, which could potentially bring light to so many new discoveries, new findings about the human body, about things we should consider in high risk environments here on Earth, and even just create possibility for new innovation. You were mentioning if we send humans to Mars, how do we support them to create protocols or maybe an AI powered machine for decision making help for these astronauts when they're in an emergency situation? What to do? These technologies could potentially lead or make way into coming back here to our daily lives, just as a lot of other space technology has. So I think it's definitely a very exciting field, which is why I'm personally very excited by human performance in space. And I remember when we talked at AsMA at the 2023 conference, one of the things that really stood out to me was our similarity in degrees. We both are studying, or I'm studying biomedical engineering, and you have a degree in biomedical engineering. And that's usually not a degree people think of when they're like, I want to work in the space sector or I want to work at NASA. And so I'm really curious, how did you get into the space sector? What was your aha moment that inspired you to pursue a career in space? And how did your career or your degree in biomedical engineering add to, your interest in space? Did you ever find it difficult to enter the space arena because you don't have the typical aerospace engineering degree?
Yeah. So for me specifically, going way back to high school, I always, I was really good at the science and the math. That was my jam, and I knew I wanted to do something. And so obviously, like engineering is kind of the go-to. Um, I also had some family members and relatives or close family friends that were in the medical field. There were several doctors as well, and so I was also really highly considering a field and pursuing medical school for a little while. Actually, I was very unsure, and so as I was doing research, actually talking with my mom a fair bit about this as well. She stumbled upon this field called biomedical engineering, which back in 2009 when I started my undergrad, wow, sorry. um, it was kind of a relatively new and emerging thing to
Yeah,
be a mainstream
right.
sort of degree, and so was like, oh, this is a really cool intersection of math and science and health and medicine and all these other things. And so for me, that was kind of a no-brainer. Um, what I struggled with when I got there was finding a, I'm going to say like a clear identity by way of academics or like what I really wanted to do, because one of the kind of double-edged swords, I think, of biomedical engineering and the program that I was in specifically, it was very much a jack of all trades. You can kind of do
Yeah.
whatever. You learn about the human as a whole. You learn about
Right.
the engineering principles behind it all. And so it was like, well, great, I'm armed with this whole arsenal of stuff, but I don't know, like, keeping with
Right.
the analogy, like what I'm going to fight. So it was very much through a lot of trial and error that I kind of found my way into a couple different places. And so I was lucky enough to be part of the Science Technology Honors Program at UAB. And their whole idea is basically to try to get undergraduates into research labs early on, and get the next wave of academics kind of really built and established and get them into that mindset long before, because most people traditionally don't get into the research piece until grad school or beyond. So I was in that. I was looking for a mentor, and I eventually wound up in a lab where we were looking at cardiovascular stenting mechanics. And so we were worried and thinking about like the forces and specific stent designs and how that impacted the flow and risk for certain developmental things to happen after you treat somebody with a stent and intervention. And I enjoyed a lot of that, but it wasn't quite my thing for a few different reasons. And so after that, in grad school, when I started, I actually went also back to UAB and just kept going with the masters because I didn't really have a better plan in place at the time. I started doing some work in a lab that was trying to extend some of the work that they had done looking at cardiac arrhythmias, and electrical signal propagation through the heart. They were trying to extend some of that to the stomach, because it was also an electromechanical organ. It works in kind of the same way, where there's some sort of nervous impulse that stimulates the muscle and causes it to contract and move things around, um, grossly put. And so I did a little bit of time with that, and I was like, okay, this still is not quite what I wanted to do. And eventually I made my way into a lab that was focused on orthopedic biomechanics with Alan Eberhardt. And that was super interesting, in a lot of ways, because it had kind of direct interfaces with the School of Medicine at UAB, and we got to work closely with a couple of different um, uh, medical folks on different procedures or designs that they had for some intervention, or some sort of bone screw or staples and things like this. And we were looking at like what's the forces? Does this improve their strength in the bones when we apply this intervention? Does it hurt it? How does that kind of tie back into everything? And so from there, I went and worked with the Army Aeromedical Research Lab when I finished grad school, and we were focused on head, neck, and spine injury, and mechanics. And what that was tied to was what we called head supported mass. So in the military, they've got helmets on. There's like night vision goggles and all these other things, and they just dump it all in the helmet because you either need it at your eyes or it's free real estate, effectively. And so is part of the work that I was doing there, we were kind of exploring very peripherally some parts of human performance. Did people complete an obstacle course faster or slower if we added more weight to their helmet, and things like this? And so that was kind of where it really like started to shine and make sense for me. That was like, yes, human performance is super interesting. It's something that I want to do. There's all of these things that go into it and impact it. And I think, again, it's a double-edged sword of the word performance. When you see it in research, is very broad. I think I saw a presentation at a conference 5-ish years ago or so, and they were saying that there's like, at the time they had identified like 99 different facets of performance. Then it's like, okay, you've got like mental and
Wow.
cognitive, but then you can break that up into like aerobic physical fitness and like muscular strength physical fitness, And then you can further divide that into a whole bunch of stuff. And then you do the same thing on the cognitive thing. You just get this massive tree of all things that go into performance. You're like, holy cow, there's a lot. But for me, like I really like those complex puzzles and challenges and interactions, figuring out if we don't give somebody enough X, how does it affect Y? And so that was when this job opportunity popped up for a human performance engineer at NASA, and all the different things that they were spanning in EVA. It was like, again, applying all of these very directed principles to a human in an extreme environment and trying to figure out how they're performing. And again, also on the technology side, like what we can do to better enable them to do these things. And so that was what really drew me in. So tying it all together, that was kind of my path and how I got there. It was maybe less so like other people. It wasn't like from a young age I was like, I'm going to work for NASA or do this thing. My drive has always been to make a difference, whether that's at, for the longest time and talking about med school, it was like, do I make that on a very, personal kind of micro interaction, or do I contribute to the field of science and do that academically and expand the field of knowledge for everyone? And so I kind of wound up in a really cool place here, kind of stumbling along where I get to do a little bit of both, which is it's so awesome. I'm so fortunate to be where I'm at. But um, that was kind of my path, and it was just a lot of unique and broad experience. I think really helped in getting me there. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's really nice to be able to hear your journey into the space because it definitely wasn't linear. And also, I don't think it's traditional by any means. But now, people are starting to recognize slowly how space is so interdisciplinary, and we need other majors apart from just pure physics or engineering majors who understand other components of space exploration, including the medical aspect of it. So I think it's really nice to also, as a student, listen and hear how you don't need to have everything like, oh, this is exactly what's going to happen, next in my life, or this research experience is going to lead to this one. I think it's nice to know how you had those trial and error moments and you figured out what worked, what you liked, what you didn't, what challenged you, and what kept you excited. And I think throughout that, like as a student, knowing that you have to explore that it's very comforting to know. And I'm glad you found your home that kind of combines everything that you put together. And so now that we're able to learn a little bit about your research, the work you do at NASA, as well as how you got into the place you are today, my last and final question for you is what piece of advice do you have for students regarding the pursuit of a passion in STEM, aerospace, honestly, any career, a piece of advice you wish you knew when you were, 10 or 15 years younger?
Whew. Yeah, I think kind of tying it back to the last point, and I think to your point as well about the flexibility and dynamic nature of backgrounds in the space industry right now, there's a lot of room to forge your own path. You can find any particular thing and you can take it as far as you want, if you can find the right venues and channels to do that. Um, One of the things that I'm actually super excited about that we're doing here in our lab as well is kind of building up a virtual reality testing and training bed for EVAs and EVA simulations, and the idea being that we can test things there in kind of a controlled research environment at a much more rapid pace without being as constrained by very limited resources, being specialized subjects or access to actual spacesuits and different testing facilities and things like this. And so that really calls out to me personally because in my personal time, like I'm a big gamer. I love spending my time and just letting my brain turn to mush after a long day at work and living, vicariously through these other people and stories. But the point being that like being able to find some intersection of kind of the gaming world and the human performance world is something that is really, really cool. And I'm excited, even if it's just a little bit more peripheral than the guys that are actually like back there, like doing the virtual reality development and coding and things like that, is really cool to be a part of. and to see. And I never would have thought growing up that like that was something that was a possibility. But with the way like the industry has adopted virtual and augmented reality technologies for testing and training and simulations and all these other things, it was like, like I could have done something in that realm before now. And so again, like find the intersection of all the things that you really like and enjoy, and don't be scared to pursue that. And there's ways to make it work. I'm sure. You don't have to always fret about the details, and have everything planned down to the minutia and this, everything. If you're serious about it and you're passionate about it, you'll find a way to do it, and that will be rewarding, and it'll keep you happy and sane all the while. So.
Definitely. I think that's honestly one of the best pieces of advice that I definitely will take to heart because, so many times you hear from a young age, like, you can become this, 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 or this. Like, it's almost like you're taught to go into these boxes and you never, a lot of kids, they don't find what initially attracts them the most. You like a bunch of things combined together and we end up conforming to society and are like, oh, I'm going to be just this or just this, going to the traditional jobs that exist, but also realizing that, we're starting to, go into a world, we live in a world where we can create our own career opportunities, our own jobs. We don't even know what jobs will be there in the next 10, even 5 years, 10, 15 years.
Yep.
So finding whatever excites you and being the first, if not following others, just finding those unique intersections and putting them together to develop your dream career is something that I definitely will take to heart, but I'm sure everyone who's listening should as well, because it's so easy to be like, oh, I'm just going to do the traditional jobs that align with my major. But I think, you should do something that really excites you. And that means combining multiple different topics together to find that dream career. So thank you so much, Patrick, for taking your time to speak with us after a long day at work. It was really nice to catch up with you once again. And I'm looking forward to meeting you again in person next year at AsMA's conference.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much. This was super fun. It was even eye opening for me, as well as I was thinking through some of it. So I appreciate the opportunity, and to you and everybody else watching or listening. I definitely wish you all the best, and whatever you may do, whether it's in space or not. There's a whole wide world and universe out there. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much.